Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Rodriguez, head of Blockworks Advisory. And today we're going to be talking about corporate chains. Are they good or bad for crypto? Before we let the panelists give their introductions, I think just to, set the stage, we've really seen the evolution of corporate chains over the past 10 to 15 years since the beginning of, public financial rails. They originally started private permission, think of the Onyxes of the world, the Hyperledger Fabrics, R3/4, so on and so forth. And more recently, we're kind of starting to see a hybrid approach of corporate chains that are taking on some of the crypto ethos of public permissionless, but still ultimately do have some central operator that I think is essentially absorbing some of the value that those chains produce. So I think later, to set the stage soon, we're going to be defining what a corporate chain is, because I think it's really important for the rest of the conversation. But with that being said, Andrew, I want to start with you giving your introduction and hand it off to everyone else.
So Andrew Peel, I'm CEO and co-founder of TVL Capital. We focus on building technology and investment products to bridge the worlds between traditional finance, TradFi, and DeFi. Before that, I spent 7 years as head of digital assets at Morgan Stanley, and I'm a board member on the Swiss digital exchange SDX.
Santiago, I'm the founder, CEO of Inversion, and excited to talk about this topic. I don't think 30 minutes is going to be enough to define what corporate chains are. I don't think the industry ever has defined that, but we'll take a crack at it.
Rob Hadick, I'm a general partner at a fund called Dragonfly. We're about $5 billion under management, mostly venture capital. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so when we first got into a Telegram chat to prep for this conversation, I thought it was going to be relatively easy to define a corporate chain, to be completely honest. That was pretty naive of me. And then we proceeded to go back and forth for 15 to 20 minutes. And I don't know if we ultimately landed on what a definition of a corporate chain is. But the one that I felt most confident in, and I'm going to kind of lay it out there and get your guys' immediate thoughts, is a chain that has an operator with equity value that absorbs any value generated by that chain. So I won't give any examples. I kind of already did at the beginning. But just kind of open it to the floor. Do you agree with that general definition of a corporate chain?
So personal view is it's nuanced. And we spent a lot of time debating on what's the actual definition of the debate itself, which goes to show it's quite an important detail. I think I personally went into the process thinking about the difference between permissioned, which I think is pretty clearly a corporate chain, typically, in my definition, and permissionless. But there's this hybrid approach, like you mentioned, and it's starting to evolve, and will, in my view, continue to evolve.
Look, I mean, I think the most important thing is understanding, what are you solving for? And then what is the purpose of this technology? Because if you have a chain where acts like a database, can be controlled by someone to change that state of the ledger, then it's very much corporate or just controlled. And I think that's how I draw a line. If you have one particular entity or group, that can control it, then I think it's a corporate chain. Now, of course, you have a continuum of there are certain chains where there is this spectrum of decentralization of control. You have clusters of validators, you have clusters of miners. But I do think that that's where, that to me is the most important thing.
So is Inversion chain a corporate chain?
It's not, in the sense that we have validators in our chain. We're open, we're permissionless, and we invite validators to operate on our chain. And we have a stream of, we acquire businesses, we retrofit them with crypto, and then there's a stream of activity that is being settled on the chain. We may run our own, but we certainly will have a group of validators. So we're definitely not a corporate chain.
Okay, Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is what we're really trying to solve for here is does this chain serve the needs of a business, or is it more of a public good, right? Ethereum is clearly a public good. Solana in some sense is a public good, right? Broader crypto ecosystems are a public good. Inversion is trying to be a public good. The chain itself doesn't operate for the interests of the core business, right? The chain itself operates as a permissionless public good, right? I think the point about nuance is important because there are different ways to do that, right? We have Robinhood on the L2 side, which is specifically saying this will be a permission change, which will essentially be some sort of settlement layer for the broad things that we're going to do in tokenization. Okay, like that's very clear cut what that is, right? And then we have things like Tempo, which is, in some sense, partly incubated and by Stripe, but the way they're thinking about, how do we put forth or how do we incentivize the transactions and the flow that we want is a way to think about block building, right? They're saying, okay, well, we'll reserve 90% of the block for this type of transaction, right? Is that different? Is that, for the behest of Stripe? Like probably not, right? And so I think there's a broad set of kind of middle ground that we have to think through and like what exactly that means. But I think to your point, and I mean, the definition you started off with was the one that I proposed, which was essentially like, does this serve the needs of the business or does it serve the needs of potentially a public good? And is it core infrastructure? And so I think that's the best we're going to do at the moment.
I mean, on that point, Rob, like, so if you're an L2 and you are running the validator and you're accruing all of those, the vast majority of those fees are accruing to that particular organization that deployed the L2. Is that a corporate chain? Because like you're still accruing some value to the Ethereum L1, but in that instance, where do you kind of draw a line? Like, I
mean, Robinhood is very clearly, there's an Arbitrum kind of like fork, right? And like that's very clearly going to like settle to Ethereum and share Ethereum security, and that's a corporate chain, right? Like everything on the OP stack, like what is Base a corporate chain? Like that's probably the more interesting question because Base is, it's on the OP stack, it's run by their own like centralized sequencer. Like there's an ability for probably Coinbase to do whatever they want there. They would, I'm sure somebody from Coinbase is going to tell me that's not true, but but anybody can build on Base, right? And you can build anything on Base, right? And like, that's where the middle ground. The question I maybe to propose is like, really, does that even matter in so much as what we're talking about?
Cool. So as I already talked about it earlier about like this more hybrid approach where a lot of corporate chains, and I'll put those in quotes, are starting to adopt like some of the crypto ethos. They are now permissionless. They are now public. Do you think like end users are actually going to be the end users, not like the crypto natives that are already here that have been participating in the on-chain economy for better part of a decade? But do you think mainstream adoption is? Do you think public and permissionless chains are required for mainstream adoption? Like, does that actually matter? Is there like real benefit for public and permissionless chains?
So our personal view is the original ethos of the crypto ecosystem is self-sovereignty and complete 24/7 flexibility in terms of the platform you choose. Composability is a big benefit. I think there is a core group of certainly the OGs and recent joiners to have those aspects. But I think a lot of people also don't really care about those things. I would argue that the majority of people just want a slick user experience, and behind the scenes, it's rather irrelevant for them about the permissionless aspect.
But I think so permissionlessness and trustlessness is kind of upstream of building a good user experience, right? Like there's no way for us to build a database that gets Robinhood and name your other fintech, right, on the same side of each other that wants to share liquidity and they want to share assets, right, and they want to share the broad set of potentially like they're going to socialize different types of like structured product risk, right, and like the different types of things they can do to build incentives, right, and that require some level of trustlessness because otherwise whatever my centralized database is going to be is probably not going to be something that it's going to have control by people that aren't going to want to allow other persons to control it, right? Like we see this all the times in like bank consortiums, right? Like Visa came out of a bank consortium, and we have to talk about the DTCC or the clearing network, right? These things come out and they kind of come out as public goods, but there's a lot of debate around who is the shareholder and like how do we build something that serves a broad set of use cases. The ability to do a global network that allows for everybody to interact with it, allows for deep liquidity, allows for permissionless asset issuance, like allows for a lot of the automated market making, right, which is very clearly a step forward for tail assets, right, or things like like an Aave, right, which like better collateral management, right, like those you cannot have those things unless you have trustlessness, right, unless you have some level of permissionlessness, right. So at the end, the on ramp, off ramp, we could talk about okay, maybe there needs to be KYC, there needs to be some sort of gating there. Like I'm totally sympathetic to some conversation around that. But at the core infrastructure layer, like you cannot innovate without that, and you cannot align incentives without that. If the internet was built in a bunch of different silos, we would not have had the innovation that we've had today, and we would not have everything that has come out of the internet as it is today.
Or potentially,
to build on Rob's point, I mean, I think the example of the evolution of networks like Visa and SWIFT, I mean, these are all messaging coordination networks that required a Herculean effort. And you peel it all back, crypto is in some sense doing that. It's just a better technology to coordinate a certain action. But it starts and ends with this trust that you're generating. Whether the end user is going to appreciate that, certainly maybe not, you could argue, but the institutions that are the user aggregators certainly will, right? And you need to have those guarantees of a credibly kind of neutral, robust technology that has Lindy to build on it, right? Because if you're any corporation that wants to build on a network is going to certainly evaluate, hey, is there aliveness in this chain? Is there security in this chain? What happens if these scenarios happen? Of a number of issues. So like, I think we're in a state in the industry where you're having those conversations at the board level, and it certainly matters. And I think that's where the technology and how it behaves and who has the ability to maybe tamper with this permissionless transfer or the state of the ledger becomes incredibly important. So it will matter.
I would personally argue, though, that certain institutions, and if we think specifically about, coming from the TradFi world, in terms of getting TradFi comfortable to allocate or operate on public blockchains is still a very challenging problem.
Yeah, but look at Circle. I think Circle is a good example here where, this technology is not perfect, but it is a marginal improvement, and a marginal improvement is a marginal improvement. So like USDC is a digital dollar that you have certain guarantees that you're trusting Circle and whoever's auditing their proof of reserves, but Circle has the ability to mint, redeem, and seize that asset. And there are very specific reasons for that, right? And at that, you have a choice as a consumer to either interact with USDC or not. And I think the proof is in the amount of traction that something like USDC or USDT has arisen, which is it's not perfectly decentralized, but it serves a very clear purpose and serves a need in the market that wasn't there. And you are trusting at some point someone, right?
I think it's actually a bit of a misnomer to say that it's like hard to get institutions on chain, right? Because it's all about incentives. Right? The second that BlackRock realized that they could make money on chain, they were on chain in a permissionless manner, right? Like the second that every single asset manager figured out I can issue this thing, I can put it on chain, and I get somebody to buy it, and it's a net new buyer for me. They issued assets on chain, right? What they haven't done is they haven't gone and said, okay, well, I'm going to do like some sort of like cost saving, like back-end ledger and like clearing and settlement, and like they were really hard for them to see like what some sort of like future like economic benefit of that thing is, right? So but if there's incentive of net new revenue and you show them that new revenue is coming, they're coming on chain. It's the same reason Robinhood's coming on chain, right? And like, what did Robinhood realize? They realized that they could sell equities through a somewhat grayly regulated kind of enterprise here in the UK in the EU through Bitstamp that couldn't have done that before, and they can essentially make more money, right? So if we increase the ways for people to build revenue, they're here, right? It's more about the
to overlay that point, yes. However, if you're Robinhood, we're talking about unit economics backstage. I think you have to then say, hey, we're going to introduce this new product for our users, like a stable coin or a tokenized X or Y. You want to make sure that you don't provoke churn. You don't compromise the customer relationship. And I think we're at a point in this technology where you look at BlackRock, you look at some institutions like Robinhood, and that's, I think, the signal, which is, yes, like they feel sufficiently comfortable interacting with this technology because it is very battle tested. It is increasingly regulated. And so they are now interacting, and so there's a whole set of incentives to do that.
But I would argue that we are nowhere near real adoption of these markets with traditional finance, because there's $300 trillion of financial assets within the traditional financial ecosystem, and there's 150 billion in DeFi, and I would say a large amount of that is actually rehypothecated and double counted. So yeah, there is interesting opportunities evolving. There are some people like BlackRock offering a money market fund, but let's face it, we're far away from full adoption to issues that exist currently for accessing those markets.
But that's not enough of a reason to say that this is I mean, like, November was a clear 180 in the regulatory environment, and the evolution of technology always does that. Yeah. And I think we're going to be in a state of the world where clearly we haven't solved everything in this.
We will eventually. That's my view. I just think there's still things missing to get the vast majority of capital that's in traditional finance to be able to participate. Some of those points I fully agree. Like, innovation is far faster within fully permissionless environments, and the ability to use composability and to innovate rapidly without asking for permission. But at the same time, there is innovation with technology that's permissioned. It just takes a lot longer, and it's still evolving is the main point.
So most of the value in crypto today is largely like housed under or valued under like generalized L1 platforms, the Ethereums, the Solanas, the Avalanches of the world. Are they? If you make the assumption that corporations are going to want to own their block space, and obviously like the app chain narrative that's been around for like a decade plus at this point, do we think corporate chains are bad for generalized blockchains? Like Paradigm and Stripe launched Tempo. Paradigm's like the most crypto native fund in the world. Like, they've been around, they're OGs, they've contributed so much public goods to Ethereum, they go around and partner with Stripe to make Tempo. Circle, OGs, they make Arc. Yeah. They're not even building on top of known current tech stacks. They're not building on top of Avalanche or Cosmos or OP Stack or Arbitrum. They're building their own tech stacks. Like, what does that signal to you guys?
Personal view is it's beneficial for crypto longer term, because if you do solve for those concerns from traditional finance by building something that's corporate, you generate activity, you generate experience, or they gain experience from that. And then in the world where there's connection between non-corporate chains and corporate chains, then I do think some of the liquidity and activity that's been performed on these corporate chains will migrate into that world, and they should support each other.
It really just depends on like the form factor, right? Like, it's unclear to me what form factor Tempo will take, but like for Robinhood L2, where somebody can only interact with that L2 like through the Robinhood app, like that accrues no value to the rest of us, right? Or like the rest of the ecosystem. Like, you could theoretically say they're renting some security from Ethereum, but I don't think that probably has any real value to Ethereum. Maybe over time as they open that up and there's like whatever, there's interop through a bunch of Ethereum L2s, it does. I think I think broadly though, to maybe take it a step higher, is is it good that like people want to come on chain? Like, absolutely. Is it good that we have stablecoin adoption? Like, absolutely, right? Do I think that like Stripe is potentially someone that we should trust with the future of how we think about open permissionless standards? Like, absolutely not, right? And so like it's a bit of a slippery slope in so much as like we want to invite everybody into the space, but we also need to be steadfast in the way we think about building the future of our space.
Right.
I mean, I can tell you from my perspective, building Inversion, we're very focused on acquiring businesses with distribution and then bringing that activity on chain. And we'll launch an L1 on Avalanche as it stands. It is easy to spin up our own chain. Right. So your question around, will everyone want to launch their own L1? I think, launching your own one, an Avalanche is very different than doing like a monad route. Avalanche sort of is out of the box, and we want to focus more on the user aggregation layer, making sure we're buying the right businesses, making sure we're serving that end customer, making crypto invisible. And then what happens in the middle layer, we haven't talked about interoperability, but I think you can envision a world where, look, we draw analogies with the internet, like clearly there were private instances and then ultimately public infrastructure wins. I'm not sure I will go as far as saying that that's how crypto is going to manifest itself, but I will say interoperability continues to improve in the space. So you might see a state of the world where you have a proliferation of corporate chains and experimentation, and you have good connectivity amongst those chains, right? The reality is the end user may or may, is not really going to care if they're interacting with Avalanche or Solana or Ethereum. You're just going to route that transaction to whatever it is that you want to do on chain or a particular business function. You talk about liquidity. I think that's where you probably may see a consolidation where, Ethereum continues to be the venue with the highest liquidity. So if you're a TradFi, a credit fund or whatever, then that might really influence where you just have a very deep concentration of people building, and that I think continues to be true for Ethereum, which is that's where most of the TVL is, that's where most of the activity is, that's where most of the corporates have kind of expressed an interest to just tap into because that's where the liquidity is.
Currently, agreed. And liquidity begets liquidity, and that's where the opportunity is currently. There could be a world as well, I think, where a corporate chain reaches this velocity and has the most significant market opportunity. And you could see some of the liquidity migrate from the now lower liquidity market, which is potentially Ethereum. So I think there is a world which could evolve if a bulk of this majority of financial assets which exist within traditional finance coalesces around a new corporate chain, and that's where the market is. Because ultimately, traditional finance and banks and look at where it makes the most sense, where's the most immediate commercial opportunity, and then build for that. And I agree, at the moment it's Ethereum, which is why the likes of BlackRock have chosen that venue.
Yeah,
the internet continues to be the right analogy, right? Like when, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, like, when I had dial-up internet and I used to go through like AOL for everything, right? Like there was an access point to the internet, and then like all of these other things happened on the internet, and now the access point is whatever I want it to be, right? But there was a period in time where like you were only going through Netscape or you're only going through AOL, and like that I think was probably the same way that a lot of people will interact here, which is that there will be an access point for them of which a lot of the stuff is abstracted away, and eventually it becomes like, okay, there's all of this other great stuff to do, and there are other ways to access it that don't necessarily have to be directly through my Robinhood application or whatever else.
Got it.
The only thing on Robinhood is, they allow inflows, they restrict that outflow.
Yeah, that'll open up over time.
They'll open. I mean, I think at some point, if you want to be competitive, you will kind of open the doors and allow your users to do more stuff, right?
Yeah, can I double click into this? So like, let's look, Base is probably the canonical example. They drove 60-80% of all economic activity in the superchain. Superchain interop hasn't gone live yet, but like, it will inevitably. What does Base benefit from superchain interop? Do they benefit at all? Is that going to create, will trustless interop across the OP stack actually create a more black holing effect of more economic activity going to Base, because all the liquidity begets liquidity, all the economic activity begets more economic activity? Or like, does Base actually lose out for having native interop in the OP stack, and then you actually see economic activity spill over into other areas? That's one of the concerns as a crypto native, I have, right? These walled gardens, they don't benefit from interop. And I will also just to double into, from an investment case, corporate chains, are they good or bad for our bags? What verticals will actually benefit from corporate chains? Is it interop protocols, like the layer zeros of the world, or will an Aave benefit from a corporate chain because it'll deploy on that chain? I threw a lot in there, but I'm kind of throw it out there.
I mean, but I think this goes back to the software example we talked about before, right? Like theoretically, if you asked me in '98, if we would be better off, if Microsoft would be better off if people used any other software, right? Like they would tell you no, right? Like you want to say it within the Microsoft software suite, right? But as technology grew, as the use of computers grew, as the use of the internet grew, right? Like that just meant that people did more economic activity through the internet and eventually through Microsoft products, right? So the question is can all types of innovation that will happen on chain, can it happen on Base? And will it be not just can it happen on Base, but will Base be the best place for it to happen and for it to foster? I think the answer to that is almost certainly no over time, right? And so are they better with just more users, right? Are they better with just more innovation, more builders, right? And if you project far enough out, I think the answer again is almost certainly yes. But of course, it's in everybody's near-term incentive to try to protect the pie, right? And it's about having a longer-term view and making sure that we incentivize that type of action.
100%.
The reality is, crypto is a technology that allows us to coordinate, and Visa took many, many years to spin up. And I think that's really the novelty of this technology, which is I fundamentally do believe that we will coalesce around a Switzerland model of a technology that is credibly neutral for banks and other institutions to interact, right? If you were JP Morgan, you launch your own chain, some banks might, for a variety of reasons, not want to interact with that. They'd rather interact with Ethereum if we have sort of privacy and all this other stuff that needs to continue to be built. Value accrual, I think the internet is an apt analogy where most value of the internet has accrued at the user aggregation layer. If you control the end user, I think a lot of things don't change, and although we are in a world where you can one-click spin up a new wallet, one-click send assets to many different protocols, and interoperability is great and composability is great, I just don't think that the vast majority of mainstream users are going to be A, sophisticated or care enough, because they're lazy. You know, you have a bank relationship, you don't have 10 bank accounts for the most part, unless you're paranoid. And so I think like a lot of things don't change, and people don't like to think about money. They'd rather interact in one platform, which is kind of an everything store, an everything app. That's sort of the thesis for Inversion, which is, you know, we will just serve our users whatever it is that they want to do on chain, and we will own like the sandwich, the user aggregation layer, the settlement layer. Anything that happens in the middle will route to wherever the application may exist. And I think that delivers value to the broader ecosystem.
Got it. Andrew, I know it sounds like you wanted to say something.
Just to comment on the whole, you know, let's call it corporate chain or permission chains from some other financial institutions. Certainly had the experience within Morgan Stanley in the former role that it was very hard to justify engaging with, let's call it a major competitor using their technology, which is completely controlled by themselves, because you're essentially providing your liquidity and providing activity to that blockchain primarily accrues to the equity holders of the bank. So it's a lot more interesting and potentially, maybe being very diplomatic, given I've always had to cover the topic on behalf of the bank historically. But the point being is really more potential to allocate to a neutral platform as a bank, because yeah, you aren't effectively benefiting someone else who's developed the technology.
Got it. Unfortunately, that's all time we have. We probably could have gone on for another 30 minutes. Appreciate your guys' time. Thank you very much for coming and listening. Have a good day.
Thank you.